Hello, everybody. Welcome to another amazing talk, what I know is going to be an amazing talk for Rebecoming the One 2023. And today I'm so happy, excited, honored to be talking with Gemini Brett. And Gemini was a speaker in Rebecoming the One last year. And this year, we're getting into a topic that I absolutely love, and Gemini is an expert on it times about 100 compared to me. So I am really happy to dive in on so many levels to this topic of looking through the lens of Lilith. Yeah, and I have so much passion about the astronomy, the astrology, the mythology, the energetics of the archetype of Lilith. And so I cannot wait to hear how this all relates to Rebecoming the One and just your wisdom, Gemini. Thank you so much again for being here for a second time.
My honor. Yeah, I definitely don't feel, especially with this topic, master at all. But I think it's a great
Well,
place to ask big questions.
yeah. Before we start, I want to read your bio so people who are not as familiar with you can hear a little about you. So Gemini Brett's terrestrial translations of the celestial conversation expressed through the ancient arts of sacred geometry, musical harmony, embodied astronomy, and number magic activate seasoned sages as much as they initiate students new to the cosmic curriculum. I would like to invite everybody to try to say that even once fast. That was an amazing sentence. I love that. He is a world-renowned astrologer, shamanic StarryTeller, and inspiring educator, best known for his devotion to reconnecting astrologers with the sacred astronomy of the living sky. Brett's passion, dedication, and innovation were recently honored by the Organization for Professional Astrology, who presented him with the 2020 Orion Award for outstanding contribution to astrology. And yes, I have taken one of your very long astronomy for astrologers courses. I think Ari Moshe Wolf and I both think of you as like the go-to person, and I'm sure bazillions of other people do also when it comes to astronomy and astrology and having a relationship to the actual physical sky, that it's not just a concept we made up. It's actually right there. Yeah. So thank you again. I'm super happy to have this conversation.
It's my pleasure. I'm really excited to be here and to explore the astronomy and the astrology together. Yeah, I mean, for me, my kind of go-to phrases are astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. So when we re-nature our astrology by reconnecting to the living sky, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. And so looking through the lens of Lilith at Rebecoming the One, I think is the full title here. I was like really intrigued to find my way to Lilith eventually. I mean, where I had studied astrology initially at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, which is a very modern astrological approach, but they don't put too many points on the chart. They started to add more over time. But then I went back into pretty traditional astrology and really kind of taking things off of the chart and trying to get more story with like less points, if you will. But Lilith just really showed me that I'm not going to really be able to tell whether an eclipse is total or solar unless Lilith's on the chart. And I was like, oh, okay, I see. Like Lilith gives me more moon. And I love the moon. Like I'm a disciple of that queen. And so I want more moon information. And I just have really seen Lilith speak over time and some kind of really deep experiences. Like eventually here, we're going to play in cosmological realms. I'm going to do a little bit of review from Rebecoming the One, and what I had to share about the not two and the three last year. But then we'll move into more of the astrology, just a tiny bit of the mythos here and the astronomy of the thing. But then we're going to get into some charts, and maybe I'll just show even one chart example today and speak about other ones that I don't have. Well, I haven't asked for consent to share because they're really kind of deep personal experiences. But it's going to get kind of deep. So I just remind people to keep like light in your heart as we move into those spaces, please. And I think it will help us understand how, looking through the lens of Lilith, we can understand more about what the one is and what it is to re-become the one. That's the intention.
Beautiful.
Well, let me put some pretty pictures on the screen. Buttons. Right. So the School of Earthstrology, that's my school. And the idea generally is that we're actually measuring astrology from the center of the earth, not from the surface where we live and breathe and can witness the heavenly happenings. Like our charts, generally speaking, literally measure our experience of Earth's experience of the heavenly happenings. And I think that's a really beautiful way for us to kind of consider more of an embodied global experience of what it is to be an earthling and to be part of this beautiful planet Earth, right? So what is Earth's experience of the moon? What is our experience here on Earth of these amazing things like diamond rings in the sky? Like what a beautiful image of the sacred marriage, right? Like how uncanny that this thing is actually possible, that during a total solar eclipse, we get this moment that they call the diamond ring. And there's some really important numbers involved, like the sacred number 108, which I'm not going to get into today, but I am going to speak just briefly about this number 400. This is like the astronomer's number for eclipse. The moon and the sun appear to be the same size in our sky, which is like an absurdly impossible miracle, right? So I always say, like, just there, like, you know, it's the matrix or the goddess, like you decide, right? And I always choose the goddess with this one, but it's so amazing that, you know, the moon and the sun really appear to be the same size in our sky, though their sizes do change slightly. We're going to speak about that some today. But the reason why is that while sun is 400 times larger than the moon by diameter, right? It's also 400 times further away. So we get this amazing effect where the moon and the sun appear to be the same size in our sky. And I feel that that means so much, and that there is something about the very kind of incarnational, device of the sun, moon, and earth that are completely kind of expressed in this amazing riddle and dance of shadow and light. Anyway, I like to see that 400 like this, like the cross and the two circles. And these would be the earth, which we describe as the cross of matter, right? The glyph for the earth is the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit, because we are spiritual beings having this experience in matter in a place with the appearance of time and space, which is necessary if you want to grow. And that's the whole gig here, right? So the sun, of course, here on the right, bring in another point within the circle, that center point, which speaks of the circumpunct, this symbol that we now use to depict the sun. And I spent a lot of time there last year, and I hope you'll review that video, which is really kind of exploring the cosmology of the sun, moon, and earth as spirit, soul, and matter through sacred geometry, through this sister science of astronomy. Moon, of course, we create this way, right? The crescent of soul. And one of my favorite learnings was when I finally started drawing geometry rather than just watching, you know, spirit science videos on YouTube or whatever. One time when I took a compass and I swept a circle, then I moved the needle and I swept another circle and I made a perfect crescent. And I was like, oh, like how many terrible crescents have I drawn in my life as an astrologer? When back then I used to just do kind of handwritten homework every time I did a consultation. And every time I drew the moon, I was like, come on, like it's so hard to do. And the beautiful truth about that crescent is it's actually two circles of the same size, like displaced from one another. And there's a lot to learn in that of I would say what a soul is. So anyway, we want to go here again. Last year I did more of this in depth, and you can go have a peek. But I'm going to speak now about the earth as kind of what is born through the union of spirit and soul. Or actually, it's more like a disunion, right? And the general idea is spirit is the one and only thing that ever was, is, and will be. I see that as sun. The sun doesn't change signs, right? Earth is going about the sun to make the sun move through signs. The sun is this very consistent light. Truly, the sun does change size. We're closest to the sun in January and furthest away in July. But it's pretty hard to tell, and you will go blind trying. Like the sun is the only one of our wanderers, right? The planetus, whom you will never be able to see which stars host his travel, right? Like you will go blind trying. The sun is this great mystery. And I love an old cosmology that looks at stars rather than like nuclear burning furnaces, but rather it's just these holes in the veil that shields us from the one light, right? And you need that veil because if you saw it in its entirety, you would remember that you are it, and then the gig is up. Because what happened is spirit, somehow by reflecting upon itself, reflected itself through a soul, an absolutely entire reflection of the one and only thing, but in a unique way that will never repeat. For me, that's what a soul is. And it's represented by the moon, who delivers sunlight to our earthly eyes, or who reflects the one light in a unique way that will never repeat. And the general idea is the cross is born in this essence of not two, right? The one becoming two. And this third and fourth thing, in a sense, are born, the cross of matter. And it's the earth, right? So this is the earth, in a sense, kind of being born through that portal of creation. We can also play it this way and say that this miracle happens where here on earth, with the human eye, which you see here, right? The sun, spirit, and the moon, soul, appear to be the same size. It's a wonderful thing to watch a solar eclipse because you get to see that truth. And you also know that soul, that moon, is like closer to home, right? Or maybe further away, because where is our home actually? So like our earthly home here in that place of matter, the place that I call self, right? It's like self and soul and spirit. So these are like subjective terms, maybe self the least of those, but that's how I'm utilizing them. Martha, do you have any questions in regard to that madness?
No, keep going.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully that's true for everybody out there also. Let's turn this on its side and honor that sacred almond, the mandorla, right? This shape that's made in the vesica piscis, the fish's bladder. It's the Yoni. It's the gateway of all creation. And while I'm not necessarily saying that the earth was born of the sun and the moon physically, or like, you know, in our three-dimensional astronomical essence or whatever, for me, cosmologically, this is the truth. Again, spirit just takes a good look at itself. You've done this. Who are you looking at, and who's looking? It literally becomes two when it reflects upon itself. We don't even know which one of those two in the vesica is the first circle. But inside this womb, then a new circle is created, a new birthing. And the general idea is like the cross of matter is born in these two circles. It's like the not two. So as soon as spirit reflects itself into a soul, it must manifest in matter. And the whole point of it is spirit is everything, right? So one is beautiful. And yes, let's re-become the one. Of course, we already are. And there's a reason why we went through this, like, not division, but reflection game. Because the one is everything, and therefore it's kind of like nothing. It can't grow because it's everything, but it will never stop growing because of miracles like you, because spirit reflects itself through soul into matter, into this place with the appearance of time and space. And the whole game of the earth is to grow, and we grow through what we go through, you know. And yes, you do, because you've come to places like this, into astrology, like you are a mystic, because you're asking these questions of what is this place and why are we here and how in the hell do we get out of here, or how in the heavens do we stay and what's it all about and what do I do, right? So great. So hopefully some pictures of circles will help. I want to speak more about the sun and the moon and the earth, and I guess serpents and such. I've read a few times now these funny little papers by academics suggesting that, wow, there are so many eclipse stories, eclipse myths from around the world that have to do with dragons eating the moon or serpents eating the sun and the like, that nothing like that comes from the so-called Western tradition. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Because this is the birth of Apollo and Diana, or Helios and Artemis, if you prefer the Greek, from their mother Leto, or in the Latin Latona, who was carrying Jupiter's child, and his wife Hera was not happy about this, or Juno, I guess I should say. I often commit the crime of mixing Latin and Greek as I tell the Greco-Roman stories, and probably mispronouncing them both. Anyway, so the general idea is that this pregnant mother was cursed to have no safety, like no place to give birth, no midwife to tend to her delivery. And she was on the run because Python was conjured up, called forth from his oracle at Delphi, and was chasing the pregnant Latona. But she was blessed, and she found, actually the curse was that she would have no safety. Unlike, I can't remember the words, but it was like the land, and the way that she was blessed is she found her way to this floating island. And so like the rule, it was outside of those rules, right? And so there she delivered the child, who actually turned out to be the first of the twins, and this was Diana, right? So Moon, who we know, moon of fertility and midwifery, and actually Diana's first gig was to deliver her brother Apollo. Some say this was 9 days and 9 nights after her birth, which interestingly is 108 day hours and 108 night hours, and 108 is a very key number for the sun, moon, earth dynamic, the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world: spirit, soul, and matter, circle, crescent, and cross. Anyway, later in life, these great archers brought some payback to that serpent. Apollo, with his great golden arrow, shot through the serpent's head, and took the oracle at Delphi, which, the oracle at Delphi is all of this wild serpent symbolism. It's such a nocturnal place. It's like, these women on these tripod, like, breathing in this like amazing like gas that's coming from the inner earth, and you're like, people aren't allowed in there, like the oracle comes out to the visitor. It's really not such a solar zone, right? So if you've ever asked, why the heck is that like the oracle of Apollo, this is why. It's Apollo's revenge against this serpent that had chased his pregnant mother. Well, Apollo, of course, a guide of the sun, and Diana, a goddess of the moon. Here we have a very clear sun, moon, and serpent story. This might be one too. This image of Adam and Eve, right? In the Garden of Eden, and this serpent, right? I don't know, maybe not the best idol for the sacred masculine here. Who's to say? But I will just suggest that while the correspondence is not as clear here, and I don't know where this woodcut comes from, but it's, I swear, the first time I've ever noticed that goat up on the mountain, and that of course intrigues me as an astrologer. But it's like the symbolism here is a little bit less clear than in the Latona story of dragons and sun and moon. But I wonder about that apple. I wonder about the Adam and the Eve of the thing, And I feel perhaps also with this image of like the world tree that there's a lot of eclipse story here. So anyway, I just had to start with my rebuke against any academic who says we don't have serpent symbolism in so-called Western stories around eclipse times. I feel we do. So we're going to get into Lilith, and an intriguing thing about Lilith, like mythically, like where that name is sourced, is in some regards, like it seems to reach back into Sumeria, and this one called Lilith, who might be a very totally different being. The Lilith were like not described in any way as friendly folk. They were these kind of screech owl demons of the night that would come and eat children, was the basic vibe. And so maybe there's an etymological root between Lilith and Lilith. Lilith seemed to come in mythically much later in some Kabbalistic works. And some suggest that it was basically like cats trying to deal with the weirdness that in the Torah, that in Genesis, humans created twice. And it's really, I find kind of amusing trying to source why and asking, different people from different, I don't know, different churches, like, hey, why is human created on this page and next on this page? So there's a few riddles there. Like in the first, it's like, it says what you'll read on like any translation is that like God created man and woman, right, in his image. But that word is Elohim, which is actually both masculine and feminine and plural. Right, and it's very much should be read as the gods. And then on the next page, you get this whole like God who actually is a different cat. It's El. It's like, like this singular being, like taking the rib from Adam to create Eve, in that story that most people are much more familiar with. You can do a lot there too if you count ribs and whatnot, but we're not going to go there today, okay? So the idea is like, well, why did they create man and woman here, and then he created man and then woman from man's rib over here? And why didn't you just stick with the first thing? Because it's a lot easier to read and feels way more balanced, like. And one thing that I used to contemplate is like, oh, well, maybe first, like there's this image of creating human in a more archetypal space, right? Like in the kind of world behind the world, right? Or like general spiritual soul self framework, right? And then to bring that into matter, some things had to go down. It's interesting if you look at like the work of Zecharia Sitchin, whose 12th planet opened up this whole, kind of approach to translating the old Sumerian and Babylonian text and text from other realms about like that this is a literal story about how the gods came to Earth and created us through their own like DNA and this kind of weird cloning project and merging us with the like beings that were already here. And I don't even mean to be on that tangent at all. I find it to be an interesting trip. But I think there's this other image that helps us maybe understand through the astronomy of the sun and moon and the earth in this strange correspondence of what we now call Black Moon Lilith, to be aligned with this point in space that has to do with Earth and Moon dynamics. It's a really strange thing to consider how these astronomical points or planets that are discovered get these names, right? Because it's not typical. Like Martha, I saw recently you did a thing on Eris Xena, right? And we can see oftentimes, like I feel like some of the names don't correspond as well as mythically as others do. But we can see that like these kind of mythic naming of these planets or points or whatever they may be, like have some resonance with the zeitgeist of the time in which they were discovered, like and how they like function astrologically. And it's, how is that? Unless, you know, that's like this great secret society of astronomers who are really like deep in the astrology, and, you know, it just feels much more like, oh, I wouldn't say coincidence here, because I prefer to use that word in its actual way of things happening at the same time, which is really relevant and important in the study of time and space that we call astrology, right? But it is this amazing like synchronicity that often like names will come in that seem to work with the point considered. And so when I first heard this thing Lilith, and I was like, oh, cool, I want to go read that. And I read these, I think like, and maybe you would know, Martha, because I know you just did a presentation on Lilith, but I think it was like 7th century or 9th century, maybe. These like, oh, there's this text. You can find your way to it really quick if you just go search Lilith online. But it's like, it's kind of like these line, like a page of quips, if you will. And like one of them is so heavy, which tells me don't take anything from this text, which says like, and get yourself ready for a really heavy line. This is not coming from me, okay? It says like, oh, what is it? Gold must be hammered and children must be beaten. Right? So I read that and I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to take anything from you, right? But in this same text, we get this description of Lilith being like born as like being created as Adam's first wife. Like, so this would be when like the gods created man and woman, and they're in the Garden of Eden, right? And she splits. And there's this passage where she says she doesn't want to lie underneath him. People usually tell that and don't tell the rest of that same line, which is he doesn't want to lie underneath her. And nobody sorts out. It's like, well, why don't you just like go side by side? Like that's totally possible, y'all. But that's not how it went. Like she leaves the garden. I think this is really important as I bring us into the astronomy and bring this like spirit, soul, earth cosmology into Rebecoming the One by looking through the lens of Lilith. I will tell you that I feel this whole thing is this astronomical story. And I feel like there's a better picture for us to be looking at when we share that. So I'm going to kind of retrograde. And we're going to look at some other kind of astronomical things real quick. So why serpents and eclipses? And the reason why is because from Earth's point of view, the path of the moon is not the same as the path of the sun. The path of the sun is the heart of the zodiac. It's really, we call that the ecliptic plane, and you can hear eclipse in that, right? The ecliptic is the plane that is described by Earth as we orbit the sun. But from our point of view, that's the sun going around us, right? And it's on a track. That's the heart of the zodiac. And the planets stay close because our solar system is relatively flat, but all planets have their own orbital paths. So they all have what we call nodes, which is where the orbital path of any particular planet crosses the path of the sun from our point of view. And the lunar nodes are the ones that we typically see on charts. And they are these points where the moon's path crosses the sun's path. So the moon's path diverges from the sun's path by about 5 degrees. And like if my arm here is the ecliptic, well, every month the moon is snaking above and below the path of the sun, like this, and literally like creates this serpent shape. So that's why we get all these serpent and dragon stories with the sun and the moon and eclipses. All right. So the sun has to be near one of these nodes for us to experience an eclipse. Like the image that you're seeing down at the bottom of the screen here is a new moon, but it's certainly not an eclipse. It's typical like this, that from some places on Earth, when the moon and the sun are in the same degree, the moon will appear to be above the sun. And that means not appear at all, right? You're just blinded by the light of the sun. The moon, we say, is under the beams. Right? Other places from the Earth, like if you looked from, Brazil in the same moment, the moon is beneath the sun. But either way, it's not there. Every year, the sun will meet the south node or the north node, these crossing points of the moon and the sun's paths. And when the sun is there, the new moons will be close enough to those crossing points that we experience a solar eclipse. Full moons close enough to those crossing points where we experience a lunar eclipse, right? So nodes are like very key to the eclipse phenomena. We'll say in one image, just astronomically, of re-becoming the one, well, there's a cycle of the moon, earth, and sun that we call a lunation, right? Which is just new moon to new moon. I mean, you can see that in that way. It's like, the moon is in the fire, then comes out and waxes until she's full and she's completely opposite the sun, and the full moon rising at sunset and setting at sunrise. And it doesn't work this way to the minute, but let's say you had a full moon at equinox. Let's say you had a lunar eclipse on equinox day, and then the moon's going to spend just as many minutes above as the sun is. And actually, still, that's not true. I like to speak with specifics, but anyway, generally speaking, at full moon, you get this full kind of oppositional thing, right? And then the moon, of course, will wane and come back to meet the sun again for a new moon. And I think that's a cool image of re-becoming the one. Like, I see moon and sun, or I say soul and spirit, as like these two parts of one only thing, right? And so like every month when the moon goes back into that fire, like they reconnect. But the month that I want to talk about today is not that month, which is called the synodic month, or the month of the meeting, or the draconic month, which is moon snaking above and below the path of the sun, but rather the anomalistic month, which is the Lilith month. So here I'm just kind of highlighting some interesting factors. Like, this is what this is telling us, is that the sun must be within less than 10 degrees of either the south lunar node or the north lunar node during new moon, for that new moon to be a total solar eclipse. These are the eclipse limits. It's a really cool table. These things are hard for me to track down. And you'll see this asterisk, which is saying that the solar eclipse may be total or annular. All right, so what an annular eclipse is it's the ring of fire. And you can have like the Earth, moon, sun perfectly aligned, right? Like heart to heart. The moon is not, above the sun from our point of view or below. It's just like the heart of the moon and the heart of the sun, like the perfect total solar eclipse alignment, but not have a total solar eclipse, but rather an annular solar eclipse where you just get the ring of fire of the sun around the moon's body, because moon's distance from Earth changes over time. So eclipses really are about lunar nodes, right? The crossing points of the paths of sun and moon. But Lilith is a very key factor in the type of eclipse that you're going to experience. And eclipses aside, just the size of the moon. Like, when moon is opposite Lilith, you get these things that we call supermoons. I mean, astronomers typically, first of all, they inherited that term from an astrologer, which is awesome. But they typically reserve that term for new moons or full moons. But regardless, when moon is opposite Lilith, and I'll show you why, and we'll talk about which Lilith, then you get like a bigger moon in your sky. So this is a photo I took some time ago of like a Scorpio supermoon, full moon opposite Lilith rising, and the moon's just gigantic. Go ahead, Martha.
This is one of your photos.
Yeah, this is a photo I took. And the moon looks big anyway when there's trees nearby, right? Like, that's just like my head will look bigger if I put this goddess stone close to my head, but supermoons do appear like larger in our sky. These thanks to timeanddate.com, which is a wonderful website. But she's showing us that the supermoon is 14% larger. This is like by diameter than the micromoon. Then I should say appears 14% larger. Like, the moon is the moon, right? And the reason why is because a supermoon is close to us, where a micromoon is further away. So I'm going to show you how to see this in a chart, and then we want to like look through the lens of Lilith to contemplate this cosmologically and bring it back to the myth, okay? So when the moon is bigger, the moon's also brighter. That's also completely dependent on phase, right? So we're just talking in this case like full moons. This is the difference in distance. The supermoon being what's called perigee, close to Earth, geo. It's like 360,000 kilometers from Earth, whereas the micromoon, and this is moon at apogee, meaning far from Earth, is like 405 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers from Earth, I should say. So like a pretty significant difference, as you can see, right? And why is this happening? So this is definitely not to scale, well exaggerated, but to kind of make the point about what Lilith is. And we need to clarify, because there are at least 3 Liliths that astrology is using now. There's an asteroid that's called Lilith in the kind of asteroid belt that lives between Mars and Jupiter, along with so many asteroids that many astrologers are bringing into their work now. And that's, an actual physical body. There's a thing called dark moon Lilith, which is based upon the idea that Earth literally has a second moon that we can never see, which is super weird, right? But it's like that's like a whole thing that happened in astronomy, and you can somehow get tables for it. I'm like, well, how does that work? If you can never see the thing, how do you get tables for it? We could ask that about this Lilith as well. So this is the black moon Lilith. And what the deal is with black moon Lilith, like imagine the sun symbol, right? The circumpunct. So you have this circle with the point of source at its center. Circles have one center point. But all astronomical orbits are not circular, they are elliptical. And rather than one center, in an ellipse, you have 2 foci, right? And so and this is like the moon-Earth relationship, because Earth is more massive than the moon, much more massive than the moon, one of the 2 foci of the moon-Earth deal is within Earth's body. It's not at our center, and that's actually an important thing, because it creates this interesting like wobble in our dance with the moon, as together we're dancing about the sun, right? Typically we're taught, and we typically teach because it's easier to, the moon goes around the Earth and the Earth goes around the sun, but really the moon and the Earth are themselves involved in this beautiful choreography, right? And together they go around the sun. I heard recently a friend of mine, Paul Kelly, describe it, because the Earth is so much bigger, as like the image of like a dad dancing with his little girl, right? And he's just like so much bigger that he's like swinging her around in these ways that feels like Earth Moon. You see what I mean? So there are times in Moon's orbit. And this is called, I'll just use that model of moon orbiting Earth because it's way easier to language, all right? There are times in moon's monthly orbit where moon is very close to the Earth, that's called the lunar perigee. And then times when moon is far from Earth, that's called the lunar apogee. And when we look to black moon Lilith, which is the second foci of the moon-Earth ellipse, our body's facing the lunar apogee, the point where moon's orbit or her path is furthest from us, okay? So actually, I like to teach black moon Lilith as far moon Lilith. Because then it helps us understand things like it's small moon Lilith, literally because the moon's further away, right? Like I'm looking at Mount Tamalpais right now. It's a lot smaller than it is when I'm looking at Mount Tamalpais from my sister's house, because she lives closer, right? And that's just like the moon gets further from us and the moon seems smaller. So it's like dim moon Lilith, small moon Lilith, far moon Lilith, right? And so the question is, what would it mean for the moon to be close to Earth? What would it mean for the moon to be far away from Earth? And by the way, this month of moon to perigee, back to perigee, so that's opposite true black moon Lilith, back to that point. Or you could do from apogee to apogee. That's called the anomalistic month. And it's 27.55 days long, if I remember correctly, on average, right? So there's many kinds of months, and we tie them all together when we explore things like the just astro wizard magic of eclipse cycles, for example. So the anomalistic month is actually something you can learn to see. And I wonder if there were like ancient tools, like just like a plate of wood or metal with like different size holes cut out where you hold it at the same length from your eyes. And if the moon fills this one, then you know she's close because it's the big one. And if this one, then small and places in between, right? So another thing that's going to change with the anomalistic month is when moon is closest to Earth, moon is moving fastest through the degrees of the zodiac. When moon is furthest away, moving slowest.
So
Right?
it's like if you're doing a centrifugal force kind of experiment, it's like you would, is this accurate that it's like as the moon is getting closer to Earth, it's closer to the gravitational pull of the Earth, so it goes faster and then it gets further away. And it's like if you're on a swing and you're doing a loop around an orbit that's not a circle, but it is actually an ellipse, then you would kind of slow as you get further, and then you might go faster. Do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
Totally. And I also appreciate how difficult these things are to say and explain.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that everybody has a feeling of how this works, and it's hard to language, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, you're absolutely right, right? So when moon is closest to Earth, there's like more pull, whether that's gravitational or electromagnetic or both or more or less or who knows, right? Like moon is then also moving faster, right? So it's like far moon Lilith is also slow moon Lilith. So as we're recording this, moon is conjoined Lilith right now. And I think at the end, we'll just kind of go through a month or two and watch the moon change speed. It's a very interesting thing. Like people have used this in astrology for a long time. It really depends on what you feel the moon means. So many will say, for example, like the moon is your feelings. So fast moon means like fast feelings, right? And so people born with fast moons might be more emotional, regardless of like the element of the sign that the moon was in at the time of birth. Some astrologies will look at like the speed of moon and the speed of Mercury relative to their average speeds, because the moon is said to be more like our kind of subconscious mind and Mercury more of our conscious mind, right? There's so many ways to pet the cosmic cat, as I like to say. For me, the moon literally is the crescent of soul. And so my question is, well, what does it mean when a soul is really close to Earth? Wouldn't that be the garden? And one that's very far away from Earth, wouldn't that be leaving the garden? And so this interesting synchronicity of Lilith by name being connected to this point that's not the lunar apogee, as you can see in this exaggerated slide, but does like direct our gaze towards the lunar apogee. Another important thing here is like there's no body in space where like Lilith is. It's just this gravitational well of moon earth love, or gravitational, maybe more. I don't know. I think the physics we don't completely quite understand yet, in my point of view.
And can I just clarify one thing, that just for people looking at this image, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is on purpose an exaggerated ellipse, right? Like
Absolutely.
yeah, the orbit of the moon is way closer to it looking like a circle than this.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's just really weird things like the way that the ellipse is moving and wobbling, like due to other factors, like where we are in relationship to the sun and whatnot. So the moon here is going to go this way around. And so this is the moon who, like over the course of the next day, is going to be getting closer to Earth and then slowly getting further away. And again, this is like this 27.5 day cycle of close moon and far moon. And that close point compared to that far point, like ridiculously exaggerated. Yeah, this thing looks absolutely more circular, but it's a lot easier to demonstrate in this regard. You're just reminding me that I've been having the intention to create a slide after this that looks a little bit more like the realistic model once we get the concept of it. Okay. So the moon's average speed, like another month, there's many months, right? So one of the months is called the sidereal month, and that's like moon from a star back to that star, or the tropical month, moon in a degree of the tropical zodiac back to that degree. It's the same length of time. It's 27.3 days. 27.321 dot 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 dot. And basically, if you take the 360 degree zodiac circle and you divide it by that amount of days, 27.3 days, you'll find that the average speed of the moon is like 13 and a third degrees per day through the zodiac. Right. So one of these goddess numbers we often hear, like 13, right? We also hear 12. Amazingly, the sun moves like 1 degree per day and the moon like 13. So the distance between the two is changing by 12 degrees per day. All this amazing like number magic and, you know, zodiac numbers in there. But a fast moon is moving more than 15 degrees per day. Like in this image where the moon is shown, she'd be moving like 15 plus. Right, a slow moon, when moon is over there at the apogee, is like less than 12 degrees per day.
Which is where it is right now as we're recording.
Yeah, that's happening right now, totally. And we can just like watch a month using amazing astronomy software, astrology software, and just see the speed of the moon change. But my big question is like what does this mean like cosmologically? These are things that you can read later when you watch this recording. You can hit pause and read that stuff if you'd like. But I don't think me reading slides is going to be an interesting thing to do. I will just say here, this like slow moon, so moon conjunct Lilith, true black moon Lilith, like less than 12 degrees per day, average moon, and a fast moon. The moon can get faster than that. There's like so many factors involved. All right. Here's an image of Lilith by Barrett Biggers. It's an amazing, beautiful painting. From 1824, I feel like I want to look at that. That seems old for a Lilith to be shown with the moon. And this image looks much more recent than 1824, doesn't it?
Yes.
I'm guessing that's meant to be 1924.
Or even sooner than that, but yeah.
Yeah, this looks like yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. This is like 2023 and a half.
But yeah, what that looks like is astrologer really wanting to source and credit the art that he finds for his presentations and probably doing a reverse image source that led him in the wrong direction. And everyone's job now, if you choose to accept it, your mission is to go look at Lilith 1824 by Barrett Biggers and see if that's a thing. Or, you know what? Probably just the title of the painting is Lilith 1824. And then why? And, you know, I know like Lilith has been worked with astrologically and like tracked and tabled since like Cepharial. It's like kind of before the turn of the millennium, like early 1900s, I believe. Right. So, I mean, it's been around. And yeah, just how did this name get connected? So when we look at some of these myths, like, this one, right? The apple in the garden. And when we look at like Inanna, for example, some say this isn't actually an image of a Lilith. And amazingly, in the Inanna story, which is something I love to tell because I love teaching Venus cycles, there was a bit of the story written later, like well after the original story of Inanna's like descent into the underworld and ascent from the underworld was written. And it's this whole thing about this halupu tree. Well, Inanna, if y'all don't know, is like what the Sumerians called Venus. And this great story of Inanna's descent and return is very much the story of how we experience Venus's dance with the sun from Earth's point of view, where she disappears behind the sun and returns to our vision as an evening star. So there's a story that was kind of written in about the halupu tree that Inanna saves from the banks of the Euphrates before it's taken away from the water. And she moves it from there to her home in which is her moving this tree from the west to the east. And so I'm sure this is the time describing Venus's disappearance as an evening star and then reappearance as a morning star, right? So that's during Venus's retrograde period. But there's a story that many have a hard time with, because she grabbed this tree knowing that when she tends to it with her own hand and foot, someday its wood will produce like her queenly bed and throne, right? But when it comes time to harvest the wood, she finds that it's been like possessed by these pests, that there's a serpent in its roots. And that there's the Anzu bird and its young and its branches, and the dark maid Lilitu and its trunk. So this is one of these places where we get Lilitu come in. And the problem that people have with the story is that she, like, because Inanna proves herself in her stories to be incredibly strong. In fact, Nana, there's not that name, but Inanna itself is kind of sourced from more of like a god of war. And Venus held that title like well before the Inanna things came in. I don't want to turn this into a Venus session. I want to be careful here, okay? But there is actually this beautiful blending in this like kind of badass warrior queen. And so people question like, why the hell wouldn't she just clear the pest out of the tree herself? Like, why does she calls to her brother Utu, the sun, and he's like, no. And then she asks Gilgamesh, who comes with like a team, like an army of crew and like armored up, and he like defeats these pests and like turns this tree into her throne and her crown and her bed. My feeling is that she calls another in because she's basically kind of creating a demonized vision of herself. So I see in this case like the bird and the snakes, as we see in so many different shamanic traditions, like the upper world and the underworld. Usually you see with the middle world this like cat, and here's this interesting image of Inanna, or so it's said, with her feet on the cat, right? Like she's taming the lion in that sense. However, look at her feet. It's owl talons, and the owl's nearby. Like there's clearly this Lilitu image here, and this is often said to be this point in the pretty heavy point in the Inanna story, right, where she's like literally killed by her sister and hung on these meat hooks behind her throne before she's later revived, right? So instead of like serpent and big cat and bird, right, for these kind of three shamanic worlds, if you will, of the world tree that we see from so many traditions, somehow in this one, if I'm right, she's like putting Lilitu in the place of the big cat. And see, Inanna is going to descend into the underworld every 19 and a half months because planets orbit. And you know what I mean? And so what does it take? And I ask you all this because I bet you've been down more than once. Like once you've come back from the underworld, why the hell would you ever go again? I think the answer typically on the other side is, to grow. It was like the best thing that ever happened to me, but it was the worst thing, you know? So I feel like she's like committing to going down again, but that's like also idiotic. And so what she does is she kind of like confuses herself by kind of demonizing her image and then having some dude come in to like slay the old wise her so she can be young and begin again. Do you feel me?
Yes.
And there's some words I just use in that sentence that I would completely erase and re-record had I the option, but I don't, and I think that's important. So anyway, sorry dudes out there. Right. Anyway, so there's this interesting like Venus Inanna connection and Lilitu, like Lilith connection all there, which I'm entirely intrigued by because I've been a disciple of Venus for so long and her great cycles. And cycles of Earth, Moon, and Sun as well. So when we look to the Moon Lilith cycle, right, which is really an Earth Moon cycle. And interesting, like the Sun is involved for sure. Like even some of the reason why imagine many of you have come to the weirdness of there's a true Black Moon Lilith, there's a mean Black Moon Lilith, there's actually other astronomical measurements. And the truth is like true Black Moon Lilith isn't quite true unless the moon is with Lilith or opposite Lilith, we can't even measure where Lilith is. It's like mathematical approximation at best, and it's really tricky. So we'll watch on a chart here Lilith just kind of swimming back and forth during the course of the month. And some of that just has to do with the weirdness of like the Earth Moon dance, which isn't like planar. It's got this like wobble thing going on, right? So the sun is contributing. But in a sense, we're really talking about moon close to Earth and far from Earth, okay? So what does that mean? Well, again, it depends on what you feel the moon means. And if you feel the moon is feelings, then, you know, they're close. But if you feel that the moon like literally represents your soul, and that's where I'm coming from, and specifically, by the way that moon reflects sunlight to Earth being indicative of the medicine that you brought in here with you, that's like a reformation of my astrology that happened some years ago just through drinking a lot of moonlight. Then what does it mean for a soul that's really close to Earth versus one that's far away? Martha, do you know in your birth moment, is the moon close to Lilith or far? And I would like ask you to consider the true black moon Lilith.
Yeah, my true is at 5-ish Taurus, and my moon is at 11 Virgo. So far-ish.
Yeah, trine. So you're generally speaking on the faster moon tip. And interesting, like Earth signs, right? So because with true black moon Lilith and Taurus, then the lunar perigee, where the moon's closest to Earth, will be in Scorpio. And your moon's close. Your moon's going to be moving close to the average speed, probably about 13.5 to 14 degrees per day. But still, for me, that's like the soul that's like looking to come here, looking to embody, looking to come to Earth and like make some moves. In becoming the one, I don't know, I think it's not necessarily accurate, but there's this general feeling of, well, what's outside of this place of like duality and matter. And, you know, I think we often associate moon with memory, but I'll say in my cosmology, she's also there for forgetting. Because moon reflects spirit in this unique way that will never repeat to create a soul that must manifest into matter. She also hands you this cup of stuff that you drink so you forget what you really are.
I can ask a thought question.
Sure.
Feeling question. One thing I've tried to feel into when I am thinking about the black moon Lilith moon Earth dynamic and the mean versus true is, so in my own journey with it, I at one point for whatever reason took the many hours that it takes to track through a year all of the true black moon Lilith retrogrades. And you can imagine how long that took me, right?
Yeah.
It was like, and I was feeling so frustrated the whole time, like, seriously? Again, because it's constant, right? The movement, if you're tracking the true black moon Lilith, like by hand, is nonstop. It's back and forth and back and forth. Okay. So I had this interesting experience of feeling this frustration with that constant movement. And then if you're tracking the true black moon Lilith with, I mean, sorry. What I meant to say, did I just say it's the true that moves back and forth and back and forth, back and forth. And if you then go and you track the mean black moon Lilith, it's so much more straightforward, right?
Yeah.
That was so, and it felt much more easy. Okay. So that was a really interesting metaphor to me to reflect on. Well, okay, but if there's anything true about our relationship to soul, our relationship to life, it's we don't go in a linear, quote unquote, easy path. Like that's not how life is, right? So Kelly Hunter in her book on Lilith, I think it's her, who talks about the idea of the true black moon Lilith. Maybe you can think of it like a belly dancer, or like I was thinking just now as I was feeling into it, I was thinking, having been in labor, right? Having been a mother in labor, like you're not going to have a linear experience of being in labor, right? So similarly, like this dance of the moon and the earth, and even you bring in the sun, I mean, it just feels much more organic. or true to what life actually is on some level. And most of what I'm saying is beyond my rational thinking. So maybe you're getting it and can respond in some way that you can articulate better than I can right this second. But
Yeah, well, a thing that came in for me, which was, I think, funny, is, well, would it be easier to re-become the one if you were totally average? Right. So like what like mean Lilith is doing is like averaging this weird movement of Lilith. Let's actually watch Lilith move.
Yeah.
So again, as we're recording this, it's like currently almost 12:30 p.m. in California time, where we both are, on Thursday, Jupiter's Day, May 25th. Okay, and this is like a fun convenience here of Moon is with Lilith right now. This is Astro Gold astrology software, and it will let me show the lunar speed right here, okay? So this just tells me where the moon is in the zodiac and then how fast the moon is moving through the zodiac, all right? So we get this less than 12 degrees per day, and that means slow moon, right? So I think let's like watch a cycle. I'm wondering how fast I need to move this thing. And this is the true black moon Lilith, which actually we know because she's retrograde. Let me show you the mean Lilith calculation in this moment. Why am I like, oh, black moon mean? Okay. There's always going to be direct. The mean Lilith takes about 9 years to go around the zodiac in a direct motion. So she'll go to Virgo after she's in Leo, and then to Libra, etc. There's a really amazing linkage between the motion of Lilith this way and the lunar nodes in the opposite way. But you can see I don't even have them on the chart. I'm just doing sun and moon and nodes, or Lilith, and very importantly, Earth is the center here. It's geocentric, right? The center of the Earth is at the center of the chart. I'm going to turn this back to, well, let's watch this at first. So as the moon's moving through, this is the mean Lilith, and just nice and kind of conveniently slowly marching forward through the zodiac at a rate of about 9 years to get all the way around, okay? Let's turn this to the true Lilith calculation. And as Martha was describing, like, you will lose your mind trying to track this whole thing, right?
But it's so beautiful, right? At the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, our life is like that, right? Like we ebb and flow and we're in and out and we're weird and trying not to be and trying to be weird and all the things, you know? So I feel like for the mystics who are watching this, like you wouldn't want to be average, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that this is a little bit, as you were describing, Martha, I think a little bit true to our really dynamic lives, you know? I think if you smoke enough TV and stuff, you can turn yourself into that perfect mean, slow moving thing. And I will say that I have seen them both function. So before I just go back to a few more slides and we'll finish this up with some conversation, I just want you to see the moon's speed here. Let me actually slow her down a little bit. And so look at, here's moon opposite Lilith, 15-ish. Okay, and then when moon's conjunct Lilith, like in the 12s, less than 12, right? So every month, and again, this is called the anomalistic month. Here's moon opposite Lilith. Oh, that time only a little more than 14. So another intriguing thing is it's like, she doesn't 15 every month. She doesn't even go less than 12 every month. It is just maddening trying to sort this out. And for me, that's good, because these are kind of like the riddles that shouldn't be solved. Like these are just, it is like when we're looking through these windows of eclipse or looking through the lens of Lilith, right? We're looking into becoming the one, and there's not meant to be really clear and easy and like average math for that kind of thing, if you will. All right, so let me show, and this is where I promised that we would get into kind of a heavy example, and then we'll talk about why it might do what it does. And I really appreciate Whitney Houston actually for being quite public about miscarriage and the times of miscarriage, right? So what I want to show you here is, this is Whitney Houston's nativity, and this was the date of one of the miscarriages that she had that you very publicly spoke about. And I appreciate that because, this is an experience that happens. Like, I really don't like this term miscarriage. It feels like finger pointy. Do you know what I mean? It feels like you did something wrong or something like that.
Mm.
And, when I'm like trying to hold space for women who are going through that experience, there's like no book on it really. There are now, there's like more things that are being offered up, but it's typically something that's kind of like hidden away, and like, it's just so powerful and personal and painful and all of these things. So in this case, you could see that at the time of this miscarriage, Chiron was transiting Whitney Houston's true black moon Lilith. And it's something I have seen again and again, that in miscarriages, abortions, stillbirths, not just that, divorce, separations, and other themes too, but I've been most kind of intrigued by how Lilith was showing herself again and again in abortion charts that I had seen. There was a time in my practice, and fortunately, this was a time when I was actually sitting with people in the same room much more. And in those times, I was like drumming as much as I was in a chart. It's a little bit more tricky to be in that space of my work through like Zoom, where most of my meetings are held these days. Although I'll go there for sure. But anyway, I was in this strange period, and this is how it works. I'm sure you've experienced this one too, Martha, and many of you out there, that like when you're counseling, like you'll get sent these different like classes, right? Where like, it seems like, whoa, everyone I talked to this month is going through this same thing. Like what? And sometimes that's just in the heavens, right? And so it's kind of expected. And it's probably always there, whether I could see it or not. But it's clearly like, okay, Spirit's like, here's your curriculum this month, deal with it. Do you know what I mean? And like, this is how you can go to as many classes as you want, and you should, but until you're like really there with it, you're really not going to learn. And so I was going through a long experience, and it wasn't only women I was speaking to, sometimes men, but like people have been looking back in their lives at this time where they chose to have an abortion, and at that time kind of did what they had to do. And at this time, when they're sitting with me, they're just like, wow, that was like a bigger deal than I knew. Like, just I know more, or like the way, like I have a different understanding of the universe now. And so I'm like kind of honoring that as a bigger deal. And I couldn't have known that then. And I wonder if I would have made this same decision then. And I'm just feeling this like this pain around it, right? So like the drum always comes out, and I'm like, okay, what's the child's name? And often, I mean, almost always, I think I've had 2 responses where a name actually comes out. Usually it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I was like 5 weeks in, or, and it's like, all right, well, is it a boy or a girl? It's like, wait, what do you like, but then oftentimes it's like, oh, it's a girl. And then like, how do I know? Like, well, why don't you just breathe? And like, we're going to like name this being, And it typically is not that long before a name comes through, and then like the deep tears come with it, And so my feeling is that these beings, right? So first of all, just for the ones that are going through this experience, like whether it's an abortion, miscarriage, it is such a deep thing, right? And you're like all alone, right? I mean, even if you have like a very willing partner who's there in heart and all of these things, it's like like women are like delivering a child whose heart doesn't beat anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it is such a deep thing, and for me it's like this is like this Lilith thing. It's like beings who want to come here and make moves and like help people grow and be like great guiding forces, right? But are like not stupid enough to get stuck here. And so they're like, let me come around. And sorry, that's like a silly way to say that, but hopefully everyone feels that I'm trying to be a little bit silly when I say stupid. I don't think we're stupid for coming to Earth. I think it's a very courageous and beautiful and amazing thing to do, to choose to like come here and feel and heal and know and grow, because as you grow, the all grows, and that's the great gift. And you will have many guides and guidesses along the way that will support you. And for me, that's some of the image of these kids. So in the Lilith story, right, she the archons catch up with her. And they're like, yo, you got to get back to the garden. She's like, no. And she makes this deal with them that she will give like 100 children that were not meant to be born the right to be born. Because one of her things was like keeping kids, I'll say, from like being born in this world. And why would you do that? Because you're purely like screech owl demon, or because you want to help those souls like stay connected to the one and only thing of spirit, right? Because as soon as you're in the garden, you're like trapped here in matter and in a body that will wrinkle and those things. You know, people say like time is like just a fantasy. Like, not here, it's not. Things spin and orbit and wrinkle. And like, you know, that's a reality of this place. And it's much harder for us to stay connected into the oneness of it all. In the one, there is no time and space, right? So as we're re-becoming the one, like consider that. Consider what you're going to give up, you know, which includes food and sex, y'all. Do you know, like that doesn't happen out there. And Lilith, I will say, and I believe it's demonstrated in this way about being like significantly activated in miscarriage, abortion, separation, otherwise, is like a lens into the oneness of our chart. And that every month as the moon gets like big and then small and comes close and then goes far away, we're kind of reminded of that like incarnational path of coming here to like do this dance and then going back into the essence of spirit. So it's another one of the many months that I really personally like to practice with and look for in a chart. So as I said before, like Lilith first kind of came into my astrology because I want everything about the moon that I can see, right? Like all I have to do is look at a natal chart and I'm like, oh, like you're born with the moon far away. And that might like ask me to ask a question that I wouldn't have otherwise. Or the moon is really close. And oftentimes, you know, when the moon is with Lilith, I'll be like, do you ever feel like you just wish you never came here? They're like, oh, like since I was 5. It's like, oh, okay. Like maybe there's something to this, you know? And would that mean that I'm a little bit more connected out there? And by the way, you know, many of us will look in like a secondary progress charts, looking at the progress lunations, for example. The secondary progressions, if you don't know, is a very strange astrological technique, a fractal timing technique where we turn days into years. And so many will look at progress lunations, like we have a new moon on average every 29 and a half days. So in the secondary progress chart, you only get a few progress new moons because they come around only every 29 and a half years. And looking at progress declination of the moon, and does the moon go out of bounds and come back in as a thing. And I think looking at progressed lunar speed, which really is a reflection of progressed lunar distance, would also be an intriguing thing to contemplate, right? Like, what is it on these times of my life where in this kind of fractal expression or auric field of time, I'm further from the garden and then come back in. Do you see what I'm saying? And that would be a 27 and a half year cycle. That doesn't start from day one in a sense, right? Because we all have a different relationship of moon and Lilith in our natal charts. And when that's like getting a little bit too advanced into the astrological language, my hope is that some of these things in these descriptions and bringing it back to earth in the end will serve in this quest for re-becoming the one, and offering that looking through the lens of Lilith can help us do this.
I love it. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So yeah, I just gave this workshop on Lilith last week, 2 weeks ago or something. So, and Lilith is probably natally maybe the top strongest archetype in my chart. If you look, well, depending on how you're thinking about it, but certainly right in this moment in the last 3-ish years, 4 years, it's been really, really activated. In the last like 2 months, it's been super activated. Okay, for me personally. So I've been thinking about Lilith a lot, and I've been thinking a lot about the story of Lilith leaving the garden. And I don't know, maybe you know, I don't know of any story that then continues. Like, what does she do when she leaves, right? so in watching my own journey, natally Lilith, the asteroid, squares my nodes at 24 Capricorn. So you can just imagine what Pluto's been doing with my nodes and with this Lilith point in my chart, the asteroid Lilith. But then, I have Jupiter conjunct Black Moon Lilith and lots and lots and lots of Lilith stuff, very, very strong in my chart. And just recently, Lilith, the asteroid, went direct on my moon and my ascendant in Virgo. That just happened. Okay, so all these Lilith energies and lessons and everything have been alive for the past many years. And when I've felt into my own story of, okay, if I'm Lilith, we all are Lilith in a sense, what did I do when I left that garden? And what has happened next, right? Like, so for me, my version of, those books where you can choose the ending or it's like, if it were Martha's version of Lilith, okay, one version could be Lilith left the garden. At first, she was pissed. She was really mad. She was really hurt. She felt disempowered somehow. And then she went and felt maybe ostracized or maybe pushed out of the garden in a way, but then suddenly realized, hang on, wait a second. I'm amazing. Like, I'm a goddess of existence. Like, I am actually the power of existence, which we all are. And so when I then come into, and you have to remember that Pluto was on my Lilith, right? So there's Pluto energy and mixed in my version of the story, but I think it's Lilith-ish too. So then Lilith goes and she has this time out of the garden and she realizes that she is the power of existence herself, and that Adam and there's nobody who could deny that, or nobody who could actually make that not true, regardless of what they do or don't do. So then Lilith, me, finds this power that's really truly me, right? And then gets to the point where she says, oh, wait, I don't need to be angry at Adam. I have a choice. I can be in the garden or not. And I could even go back and forth and I can do what feels right to me. Adam doesn't hold the power of existence. That's me. I am the power of existence. That's me. God holds that power, right? And I hold that power. So it's really a relationship between me and source. And then if an Adam happens to be something I choose to engage with, great. And if I don't, then fine. And I can, anyway, you get my point. Like, I'm curious, what's the continuation story to you, or what's another version, or how do you feel about that version?
Well, I mean, I think most importantly, like choosing to finish the story according to what feels right will tell the
Mhm.
right story for each of us, and
Yeah.
that's not only like a human ability, but perhaps a responsibility to like
Mm.
one of the things I love to do personally, but also with clients, is like when there's a dream around, especially a recurring dream, to go in and kind of finish the story, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, the question that popped up for me is like, well, what's Eve gonna say when you come back into the garden, Lilith? And
But this is another thing actually that was so beautiful. When I was doing that workshop, I came across this image on Pinterest of Lilith and Eve together, and it was a painting titled "Lilith and Eve Fall in Love." I love that for so many reasons. But it's, what if it's not an either or, like in ourselves, like what if we don't need to choose to be Lilith or Eve? What if we can be both, and it's okay. Like, Eve doesn't need to be boring and the thing we don't want to be if we are Lilith, right? So maybe Eve and Lilith actually can even be in love inside ourselves. I don't know. I mean, um, that goes down a whole other road, but
these are all roads we should go down, and I
yeah.
think that's another wonderful invitation for folks to tune into. By the way, I just did a little bit of research. So one is, let me just kind of rearrange things so I'm not showing things. One is I looked at your secondary progressions, Martha, because I have a file on you.
Hmm.
And you're currently having Moon Lilith in the progress chart, right? And it's actually kind of coming over the looks next year or 2 years, depending on whether you look like natal Lilith and true Lilith and mean Lilith. So that's pretty intriguing just in regards to theorizing around are
Yeah.
these times when Moon is at Lilith progress that we're like more inclined to become the one, and you're literally like offering this series of talks and classes and whatnot to community around it. So I'm intrigued by that. The other is that I went and looked for Lilith 1824, accepting that assignment that I had offered. And I guess what it looks like, so this is this Barrett Biggers painting that we were looking at before, which is such a beautiful painting. But I think maybe it's telling us that this is Astro Seek. And by the way, I hope this doesn't hurt, but it seems like you could have gone here instead of tracking all the retrogrades,
Oh
maybe.
no, it was a good, yeah, no, it does hurt a little bit,
Yeah,
but
Astro Seek is just a wonderful website. But maybe 1824 is True Black Moon Lilith. And that's just like the astronomical assignment. So like if you go to like
oh,
astro.com and put True Black Moon Lilith on the chart, it might be 1824 that's
that
necessary
is,
to do so.
that's hilarious. That
Yeah,
is so
cool.
funny.
So we solved that riddle, and hopefully some others as well. Um, and I think the last thing, maybe since I'm already as expected, like time and half
Yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
is just to offer that if you're interested in exploring some more of this sun, moon, earth astronomy, and not just like in science class and the astronomy of alone, but like bringing that into context, right? Contemplating what this means cosmologically and what it means for us and how we can respond to it and work with it. There's a workshop series. It's actually two classes. I'm showing one here called Enter the Dragon, and the other one is called Return of the Dragon, where I lay out like the eclipse framework astronomy, not only astronomically, but mythically. And it goes deep and into some really weird sun, moon, earth things that are just mind boggling. And then shows us how, like, why there are eclipse cycles and how we can work with them energetically. I actually launched this class while I was experiencing an eclipse on my sun in October of 2022, and then fully got eclipsed and couldn't even finish it for some time, and then had to come back to it. So you get to be amused by some of that stuff as you look into a time that I currently perceive as the past. But yeah, we came through, and it ended up being a lot longer than I had intended it to be, which is typically how I roll. And I think it's about 13 hours of class and study groups and chart examples and things that you can find your way to if you'd like. So thank you, Lilith, and looking through this lens of Lilith to something outside of the garden. Well, I think there's certainly a good and beautiful reason that we are here. And we want to be here. I think contemplating what is not here actually helps us be here, not takes us away.
So beautiful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Martha. Thanks for inviting me again. I'm excited to watch all these other jams, and I think you're doing I know you're doing a wonderful thing, and I know everybody out there does too. So I celebrate you, and I think I'm excited for re-becoming the 1-2, and hopefully re-becoming the 1-3 next year.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that you want to share with people about where to find you, what you do, what you offer? I mean, there's this class, and I'll put that link here with the video. It's not part of the symposium, just to be clear for people. It's a separate thing that you're offering on your own, but I highly, highly, highly recommend it. And yes, but is there anything else you want to say about what else you're doing?
Yeah, so GeminiBrett.com with Gemini T's, meaning two T's, is where you can find me. If like I do sessions, right? And I do private mentorship for people who are learning astrology and want to engage, especially like in the quadrivium way, where I also teach sacred geometry and the astronomy, and musical harmony can be a beautiful piece of this too. So it's like kind of the old approach, and then really engaging with charts. So you can find out about that stuff there. And also in the courses page, you'll see some things that I'm up to. Like I'm just about to launch a fractal time class where we talk about progressions. So progressing, profecting, including solar arc directions, which are actually a profection, and directing charts, primary direction. So like for those of you who are in the astrological study, this is much more of an intermediate to advanced class where we get outside of like using transits alone to understand like what's coming our way, and into these amazing time fractal weird things we do in astrology. So I'm always offering classes. I just finished actually yesterday a long trip with fixed stars in astrology and bringing the fixed stars into our charts through projections and parallels and parans. So over time, there'll be more and more things popping up on the courses page. Right now, the eclipse class I just spoke about is actually truly eclipse. It's not even shown there. So if you choose to join that, know that it already happened. Like all that stuff's been recorded. I'll probably offer it again live someday. But yeah, find me at GeminiBrett.com and you'll see a bunch of things that I'm up to. I'd love to meet you.
Beautiful. And I'll just add that I did do a series of one-on-one sessions with you almost 2 years ago. And it was meant to be one thing, and then life happened right in the middle of it. And you got to be the sounding board for a lot of very intense personal things. And you handled it so beautifully and were incredibly supportive. And so I'm saying thank you to you. And I'm also just letting people know that you are a really wonderful, beautiful, supportive human. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that reception and reflection. And that's how it's supposed to go, life, because things ebb and flow and get near and far and all of these things. So
Yep.
I guess Lilith teaches us about that too.
Yep, and sure does.
All right, thanks, Martha, and thanks everyone for playing along.
Thank you.